Welcome to StartHer, the podcast dedicated to sharing stories that ignite female entrepreneurs into action. I'm your host, Elizabeth Goede, and I'm here to fan the flame of your entrepreneurial spirit. Each week, we bring to you the inspiring stories of women trailblazers from around the world who have sparked change in their industries, powered their ideas into thriving businesses, and pioneered their way to success. So, whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a startup enthusiast, or a seasoned business leader, join us as we delve into the journeys of these incredible women whose tales will surely ignite a spark in each one of us. Today, I have with me a true Renaissance woman. Dr. Eliza Collins has a fascinating background that spans from opera to rock bands and from Eastern medicine to psychedelics. She's a psychedelic consultant, burnout expert, and doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine who has made it her mission to help individuals get unstuck and find balance in their lives. As a woman entrepreneur herself, Dr. Collins deeply understands the challenges of running a business while maintaining a personal well-being. After experiencing and recovering from burnout, she has dedicated her career to helping others identify negative coping mechanisms, explore their boundaries, and bring a sense of harmony to their bodies and minds. With her unique approach that integrates Eastern and Western medicine practices, including functional medicine, acupuncture, Chinese herb medicine, and hypnosis, Dr. Collins offers a holistic perspective on healing that seeks to fully integrate the mind, body, and spirit. Beyond her clinical work, Dr. Collins is also a published author with articles featured in Medium, Thrive Global, and Bustle. When she's not transforming lives, you can find her immersed in music, reading, rock climbing, and having solo dance parties with her cats. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the show. Eliza's so excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm really thrilled to be here.
So, Eliza, I love your background. I love the playful nature of your background in this very, sort of like the melding together of two totally different mindsets and perspectives. And so, my first question for you is really sort of like, where did you start? Did you start on the Western side and move to Eastern? Were you always in sort of this healthcare space? Tell me more about like where your inspiration came from to start your, Dr. Eliza Collins.
Oh man, how much time do you have? That's a 42-year journey. So in my 20s, I went to school. I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry. I'm kind of a STEM nerd, and I graduated with this degree, and I knew I didn't really want to go into research. I had interviewed for like pharmaceutical research positions, and that really didn't light my fire. It's very useful, meaningful work, but I didn't want to be in a lab all day. So I took most of my 20s to start to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and then realized along the way that that's a bit of a fallacy. We grow and we change. We have this idea, I think, when we're young of like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
And it doesn't factor in the fact that we still need playfulness, that we need joy, that we should have a sense of fulfillment in what we're doing, even if it's not like our dream come true. And
Right.
so I was sort of sold this idea, I think, from the 1950s, 60s, 70s of you go to school, you get a degree, you get a job, you do that job, you earn money, you buy a house, you have a family, that sort of very kind of prescriptive way of going about things. And I'm a millennial, sort of that borderline of Gen X and millennial, where like we don't have those lives at all. The world looks very, very different. So I got out of undergrad and I was very untethered. So I waitressed and I bartended and I spent a summer working for a financial advisor, and I got a job doing administrative work in the medical field. And I saw it was at a sports rehabilitation and physical therapy office. And I was like, oh, the patient side of that looks kind of neat. So I did a stint at an oncology floor as a patient care technician, and I became an emergency medical technician. That was sort of like my next kind of gateway drug into the medical community. And I really enjoyed being an EMT, but it's a very very high stress environment.
Mm.
And it's a very limited scope of practice. So you're kind of getting somebody in one of the worst moments of their life and you're stabilizing them and you're getting them to a hospital where they need more care. And then it's hands off. And then you do that again and again and again. And I didn't like the lack of follow through. So at that point, I started looking into med school and physician assistant programs, kind of on the Western side of things. But having been immersed in that environment, that while very useful and necessary to like functional society, um, it wasn't like, my great uncles who were the town doctors when I was growing up, where they knew your name and they knew your family and everything. You had 15 minutes with your clients in this model. And I really didn't like the fact that there wasn't as much forward facing time with people in that respect. And so I started looking for alternatives. I actually went to a tarot reader that a friend of mine recommended. And I said, I'm very confused as to what to do with my career. So I want to just get some clarity. So she pulled a bunch of cards and I remember her saying, and I realized this is what, by the way, can I curse on here or no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is what my partner refers to as airy fairy bullshit, which I love. I love that phrase. I use that phrase. I think it's in my branding or it's in my copy on my website, because we totally love it and we're here for it and we're in it, but it's also like, it's airy fairy bullshit. So I went and I had, the airy fairy bullshit tarot reading, and this woman who's great, she's very good at what she does. She pulled a bunch of cards and said, okay, we're going to do like massage therapy, craniosacral therapy, aromatherapy, acupuncture, chiropractic, like sort of all of the alternative at the time modalities for staying in healthcare, but not being on sort of the sick care side of it, like being more of like preventative and comprehensive. And so she flipped all of these cards and she said, acupuncture is what's right for you. She goes, that's where the money's at. Not initially, but that's the path that you should go down. And so I went home and I just Googled acupuncture, which I had only ever heard of before, sort of tangentially. And it turned out there was a graduate school an hour away from where I lived in the middle of nowhere in Western New York. And I was like, okay, we'll follow that. We'll pull that thread. So I went and I interviewed at the school and I did, a tour and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it. And so I enrolled in graduate school based on a tarot card reading and moved up to Providence, Rhode Island after I was done, started a business in a city where I had zero connections and no foundation, and have spent the last 10 years growing that and growing as a practitioner and, finding what I initially thought were kind of like weak spots. I have a recovered imposter syndrome. So, all of the alphabet soup that's after my name, like Doctor of Chinese Medicine and certified hypnotist and certified functional medicine practitioner, that came from a lot of not enoughness, which led to burnout as I was, growing my business, which is how I ended up in burnout recovery and then helping other people go through it. A lot of what I've ended up doing as a professional is the results of a little bit of my own fuck around and find out. And so I've gained a lot of skills as a result of that have resulted in me being a fairly comprehensive provider and having a lot of different hats to wear when I work with clients. So the majority of what I do now is acupuncture and collaborative coaching, with some of the psychedelic work mixed in. And again, psychedelics were something that came to me as a result of my job. I work with veterans, and about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I had a few of them, sort of the younger guild, in their 20s and 30s and 40s, who were utilizing them for PTSD. And so I said, okay, as a provider, as somebody who works with these people all day, every day on, pain management and PTSD, which are very tightly related, I have a responsibility to understand this. And so that's kind of where I got into the research element of it. And then I ended up utilizing them for my own benefit and healing. And through that combined process, I was like, okay, I've got the skills to now help other people utilize this as well. So that's my, very compressed 5-minute journey of self.
Well, 40 years into, a few minutes, which I think you did an excellent job. I really felt like I was along for the ride there.
Thank you.
So when you actually decided to go from the clinical side, go into acupuncture, eventually by working with patients and find your way into sort of the psychedelics world. Were you, as your company, as the Dr. Eliza Collins, entity, was that working with the VA, or were you actually working with veterans coming to you as private practice, or were you working in the veterans hospital? How did that work?
So I'm a private practitioner, and so I don't do psychedelics with the VA or anything like that. And I actually don't provide psychedelic material, like the substance, to anybody, because that is still federally regulated and federally illegal. So while there are certain places throughout the United States, like Colorado and DC, and municipalities in Massachusetts, like I think Cambridge, Salem, Northampton, East Hampton. There are a few places where they've decriminalized it, which basically means like it's not technically legal. We just sort of don't care about it. We're not going to prosecute you for it if you have less than a certain amount.
Sure.
So for people to choose to utilize psychedelics, I help them with the preparation of that process and with the integration as they're doing it and after they've done it. But I don't provide anything to them because legally I can't right now. We're hoping that that landscape starts to change a little bit more in the next couple of years, which I think it will, just given the popularity and the fact that people are doing it anyway. That's kind of how I ended up in it. It was like people were coming to me and saying, I have 5 grams of mushrooms. What do I do? I'm like, not all of it. Like, not all of it. So, when that's the question of I have 5 grams of mushrooms, what do I do? I'm like, oh, okay, we need support. So
Yeah.
I'm the support side of that. But with the VA, I was an independent contractor, and they didn't have enough acupuncturists on staff at most of these VA sites
Sure.
to be able to provide services. So they contract with external providers such as myself. And so they refer their clients out to us to come for acupuncture services. It's a population that I've been working with pretty much since the inception of my business. And I absolutely love working with them. It's such a great group of people to work with.
Yeah, it's I'm actually married to a veteran. My dad's a veteran, and all the way back, like all the men in my family have been. So certainly a special place in my heart, and I'm glad to hear that you're helping support, and especially through those services and PTSD. I mean, those are really real dangerous conditions that people come back with after they've sort of participated and seen what they've seen. So thank you very much for helping all of our men and women who have served.
It's my pleasure, truly.
So Eliza, when you set up your practice, and I love the fact that a tarot card reader sort of set you on this journey, and what an incredible journey, a journey that set you on. Did you set up an actual brick and mortar business, or how did you foray into actually launching?
We didn't actually get a lot of business education when I was in grad school because it was an acupuncture program, right? So we had like 1 or 2 business courses, but I didn't get an acupuncture degree and an MBA.
Right.
So it again was very much like the fuck around and find out. It was like, okay, well, you need a business, you need a physical location because you can't do distance acupuncture. You can do distance Reiki, you can do distance Qigong, but acupuncture is kind of an on-site thing.
Right.
And so I started by renting a room from somebody else and sort of expanding my way out from there. And they say the overhead is fairly low. It's not. That's another sort of
Right.
misnomer that we have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very much largely just kind of building it out slowly myself, taking a bartending job, making sure that I was making ends meet while I was doing that, and slowly building up my clientele, getting contracts with organizations like the VA to make sure that I can provide services to people who need them if there is a shortage of providers in those instances. And I've worked with different organizations throughout the years that either provide services for people like veterans or people who are on Medicare or Medicaid, or who meet low-income criteria. A portion of my practice, anytime that I've been eligible to work with those types of organizations, is a group that I've worked with because I like being able to provide that service and give that back for people who wouldn't normally be able to utilize those types of services. But yeah, and that's part of what led to my burnout, was that I was doing this in a container mostly by myself.
Right.
When you go to medical school, oftentimes you can get hired by a hospital or a medical practice. Like, you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. Whereas with acupuncturists, we don't really have that type of structure
Mm.
in our work. Most people go into business for themselves, and many of us figure that out along the way. And so we figure out what not to do by doing it, and sometimes doing it for a long time, like longer than we
Right.
should.
Right. Yeah, and I think that as being a female with working with a lot of female entrepreneurs, I think it's the can do. I can do it. We're caretakers naturally.
Mhm.
And so when you look at sort of the can do attitude coupled with the need to nurture and care for others, it is absolutely a recipe for that burnout disaster to happen. It's not a surprise. I would say, whatever 95% of my guests, I think, would say that they sort of reach that catalytic state of like, I've got to make a change or I've got to make a difference because I can't keep doing things like this, and it hits people in different ways. And I do want to touch on a couple of things that you said, like when you're in school, or you're going through a program and they're like, oh, it's really low, or they make it sound like magic. Like you just do this. I have a BFA and I was an
Mhm.
illustration major. And, they just sort of said, you freelance. Like it was just like, oh, I just freelance. Like that's just a thing.
Right, like
And
I had salad for lunch. Like it's just, you know.
And so I appreciate the fact that you're being honest about like, listen, just because you're a clinician and just because, you have these certain skills, like, maybe like in relationship to, did you have to take on a huge staff and rent a huge building? Yes, it's a low cost way to enter, but it's not free. Having any
Right.
form of business is not free. I talk about that a lot on this show. And it's also like you better freaking love the thing that you're doing because it takes a lot to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that was really challenging about my business and why I did it the way I did it for so long, which was so far out of alignment with my values and what I actually need as an individual, is because I was doing it based on somebody else's template.
Mhm.
And for what it's worth, one of the people who said, "Oh, it's super easy. Like you go and you do in-service lunches at doctor's offices." I'm an introvert. I don't talk to anybody. I talk to my cat. Like that's who I talk to most of my time. That's where most of my vocal energy goes. On my weekends here, I don't, especially now post-pandemic, that was just an opportunity to lean into my introversion hard.
Right.
But I don't like public speaking, historically speaking.
Mhm.
And so it's not easy for me to go. It takes a lot of emotional energy and spoons and nervousness and anxiety to go out and do something like that, to put myself in front of people. And the person who told us that he's a Labrador retriever. He'll talk to anybody. He's very gregarious. And so, yes, I used to be in bands and perform. If you want me to sing an in-service lunch, I can do that all day, particularly if it's classic rock and soul. But I'm not going to go and sit and talk about it. And so some of the barriers to building a business for me, or the reason that I burnt out so badly, was because I was building a business very out of alignment with who I am as a person. And I
Yeah.
wasn't respecting what I needed as an individual and what I personally wanted out of a business. This
Mm.
is my life. What do I want out of this? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, and it's first of all, I'm married to an introvert as well, and he's got some extroverted qualities to him. Like he still wants to be out in public, but not necessarily with people, if that makes sense. And so I've learned a lot about that because I am very much an extrovert. I am the Labrador Retriever. I will talk to anyone. I will make friends with my cashier, checking me out at the grocery store. And so I think it's really interesting to look at how you can build a business even knowing that you're not the Labrador Retriever. And
Mhm,
you can be successful in building your business when you're
mhm,
not the Labrador Retriever.
mhm.
So when you look at what it takes to actually build your business, what would you say has been like the biggest benefit to having your own thing?
Oh, man. I go back and forth on this all the time because, like, it's easy to focus on the stuff that you don't have, like you don't have PTO or it's harder to get health insurance or whatever the case may
Right.
be. I have an unprecedented level of flexibility.
Mm.
Like at this point, I'm feral. I can't go work for somebody else. I get to make my own rules. I get to decide what my life looks like, what my business looks like. And the thing that, like, as an introvert, people think we don't like people. It's not that. I love to make friends with my cashiers. Oh my gosh. Like I make friends everywhere I go. If my boyfriend and I go out to a bar, I remember we went out once at one point and he goes, "Do you want to sit at the bar?" Because we were like sitting on a couch by ourselves. And I was like, "No, I'm here with you. I want to snuggle and drink a cocktail and be gross in public the way that, people look at couples like that and they're just like, ew, they like each other." And he goes, "But you like to talk to people." And I said, "And I will have hundreds and thousands of opportunities to do that. Right now, I'm here with you."
Yeah.
So the introversion isn't that we don't like people, it's that we just get drained from that output of energy. But
Yeah.
if we manage that carefully, we're fine. And I put a lot of my energy into my clients and into creating relationships with them. I'm not just doing acupuncture. I'm not just doing coaching. Part of the reason that I say that I do collaborative coaching is that we're in this together.
Mm.
I'm walking with you side by side. I share a part of my own journey. If it's relevant, if a story about me screwing up or me learning something can help you, people
Yeah.
learn a lot more about me as a coach than they would if I were a therapist. Because
Right.
it's a very different scenario. It's a very different situation. So I put a lot of myself and I focus on my relationships. That's what gets me clients
Mm.
because then people refer based on that. And so it took a little longer, I think, for me as a provider because I wasn't used to putting myself out there. And I historically do not like networking. Things that we traditionally think of as valuable when it comes to building a business are not only not my strong suit, but they're things I genuinely don't care for. I don't want a surface conversation. I don't want to go hand out 50 business cards and hope that 5 people call me back
Mm.
based on inauthentic connections. And so the ability to understand myself and who I am and how I function in the world is probably the thing that I've appreciated most about the business ownership process is because I've learned a lot about myself. And the more I learn about myself and the more I address who I am as a person authentically, that gets me more business
Mm.
simply just by being who I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of work to try to be somebody else.
Yeah, so much. It's
It it
exhausting.
it is exhausting. It's exhausting, and I think that it's when you're in this space, and obviously I love to support women in business at all different stages, right? From the ones that are like, hey, I might have an idea, to like the ones that are like, hey, I want to exit and like make some money on this thing that I've built for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is. What I always am surprised by are the people that are like, I want to start a business. Someone give me an idea of what that's supposed to be.
Yeah,
And I always want to say to them, I'm like, well, I mean, you can do that way. And I'm not even saying that you can't make money doing that. But like long term, you're gonna have to find someone like you, right?
right,
Because you're gonna reach this point where it doesn't, you realize how much you've been raging against yourself and you won't be able to continue to move forward.
right.
So I'm so thankful that there are people out there like you that can help, navigate through these very difficult situations. So Eliza, when you think about, the difficulties that come with having a business, right? So you certainly dealt with tons of them in the beginning. You're trying to figure out how to like build a business when, you're not necessarily getting energy from the like sales part, which is like the bulk of
Right,
starting.
right,
You figure out that it's more expensive to start than maybe what had been in the realm of what you're understanding. But like as you got into the business and you like figured things out, what are the things that have been hardest? Still continue to sort of be like the bane of your existence.
Oh my God. Pushing against and managing my internal boundaries. Like that, we talk about boundaries and burnout all the time. They're absolutely necessary. And I think there's been a huge cultural shift in terms of like, no is a complete sentence, which is also a phrase that I don't particularly care for anymore. But, there's a lot of like learning how to set external boundaries with other people. And there's not been much focus on setting internal boundaries. And the first place that I kind of realized this, and I figured it out myself before I ended up working with a burnout coach, but I hate answering calls and text messages and emails off hours.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that really contributed to my burnout heavily in the first year or two of my business when I was young and green and hungry and I just wanted clients all the time and I was worried that if I wasn't available all the time, nobody needs an on-call acupuncturist. I'm going to say that again for anybody who's listening who is an acupuncturist. Nobody needs an on-call acupuncturist unless that is your passion and that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Nobody needs it.
Yeah.
So I was answering text messages at like 8 p.m. on Sunday nights for Monday morning appointments. And I'm like, I hate this. I hate that I'm tethered to my phone right now. So I got an app that's a second phone line that I can log out of. And this year, for the first time in my 10th year in business, I hired an assistant strictly to do client communications. Her entire job is, and it's perfect because it doesn't drain my wallet. It's not like a VA that I'm paying to constantly do every single thing, but I don't need to stop what I'm doing in the middle of my day and check my phone.
Right.
My client or my assistant handles all of it. It's very affordable. It's minimal effort on her part. Standard operating procedures are super easy. And I get to keep that internal boundary of not checking messages when I'm not here. I will get your message from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday. That's it.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting, very necessary example of my internal boundaries, but managing those on a day-to-day basis. Like my business just recently upticked again to the point that I have limited availability several weeks out. Usually I've got a little bit of flexibility and I like to keep that. And so this week I've been like, do I start working Fridays again? Do I? And then like there's that voice in my head who's like, no, you silly bitch, don't. Like you love your Fridays. You need your Fridays off because you are forward facing 4 days a week, 8 hours a day, plus the rest of your life in general with your partner and his kids and your family and all of it. Like you need that day. So don't get into the scarcity mentality and violate your own boundaries. That's been one of the hardest things as a self-employed business owner because I'm me, but I'm also my business. And so figuring out where those lines are and sticking to them, whether they are challenged by a sense of obligation, a genuine sense of desire to help. Like I love my clients. I'm like, a big piece of wanting to work Fridays again is like, I can see more people and that's really helpful and that's very useful to them. And yes, it is, but is it useful to me?
Right.
That's
Well,
been a big one.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we all need to sort of protect that time that allows us to sharpen our axe. If you've ever heard that story about the two people chopping down the tree, and it's like the person who wins is the one who actually took all this time to sharpen his axe, right?
Right.
And it's we all need that like reboot time. I found myself in my office similar to you over the weekend, and I even did a post about it. Did anybody accidentally find themselves in their office on Saturday? It was truly like an accident. I came in here for something else and something came to my mind. The next thing I sit down and like 3 hours is gone. But the reality is, had I just stayed out of my office on Saturday, like I would have been better, right? But like better for me. And so I love that advice that came by expressing that struggle. I also love the fact that you were able to acknowledge the fact of like, hey, this isn't my skill set. Hey, this is not the thing that is the best use of my time. And there's somebody else who actually wants to do that job and they're going to be really good at it. And I think it's also, again, this like can do attitude. Can we do it? Yes. Should we do it all? No. So I love that you're bringing those points up. What would you say has been the biggest surprise for you? Like, what's that thing that you're like, wow, I didn't expect that at all?
Psychedelics.
Yeah.
I mean, really. So I was not a partier. I was a very straight-laced kid. I grew up drinking Nancy Reagan's DARE program. I have family who lives in civil service, and if you ask them I don't actually remember what DARE stands for anymore, but I do know that some of my family who's worked in civil service, if you ask them now, they say drugs are really great or drugs are really excellent. That's what it is. Because we're seeing this sort of renaissance of like utilizing things that were, considered bad for very useful purposes. Like psychedelics are not addictive, which is amazing. They're actually a classified drug, which helps people with addiction. So if you had told, I don't know, 18-year-old me, 22-year-old me graduating from college that I would be working in psychedelics, I would have laughed in your face. the evolution of how I've grown as a person, uh, and the fact that there are ways in which I thought I was growing that were hurting me.
Mm.
The lack of childlike joy
Oh,
that you get from things, like I put down music for a very long time. I don't perform anymore. Um, but I didn't allow myself a lot of that because it was like, oh, these, we put away our toys from childhood. Screw that. I still love bubbles. Like I dated a guy years ago and I got excited about a cupcake. We went to like a bougie cupcake place and I got so excited. And he was like, "How are you this excited about a cupcake?" I was like, "Have you looked out the window?
yeah.
It's an on fire trash can out there many days on a 24-hour news cycle. I need to get excited about a cupcake." And
Right.
so being able to bring silliness and play and joy back into my life, I've always been a little bit goofy, but I was so self-conscious. And now I think the joy of my 40s is like, I don't give a fuck what
Yeah.
anybody thinks about what
Right.
I like or what I
Right.
wear. I do to an extent. I want to be professional, but more than anything, I want to be me. And, I'm wearing scrubs right now. I wear scrubs at work, partially because it's professional, partially because they're clean, and partially because I call them work pajamas. They're comfy as hell. And, so there is an element of branding and consistency, but it's much more rooted in authenticity.
Mm.
I'm not going to do that if it's still not authentically who I am. And so the surprise of being far more childlike as an adult than I think we were sold, and the benefit of being able to work a lot of that into who I am as a practitioner and into my branding. People come to me because I curse. They come to me because of my goofiness or my witchiness or, my off the wall ideas for how to help them move forward. I use tarot. I read tarot cards, and so I'll use them in a client session if the person's open to that, not because like we're going to tell your future, but we're going to utilize these as a tool to ask you really thoughtful questions that I might not come up with because the card that comes up says, okay, like this is the death card. Death doesn't mean that someone or something is going to die in a traditional sense, but it does mean that like something needs to go in order for there to be fertile ground for something else to come up. So what does that mean to you, the client?
Mm.
And those types of just quick verbal prompts have sent people spiraling off into a dimension I never could have reached simply
Right.
by my own skill set. So the ability to play and find joy and creativity and curiosity
Mhm.
has been huge.
It's interesting. I always talk about artificial intelligence as that. So artificial intelligence doesn't understand the four walls of the box that you've created for yourself because it doesn't have that ability to know what's inside of you. And so, when you use the tool right, it allows you to actually expand beyond those walls. So I love the fact that you're using tarot cards to do that.
Yeah,
I
my partner
cannot
uses ChatGPT quite a bit for that. He's like, "I want this, and I want you to respond to me as though you are not an AI." Like, he has very
yeah,
specific ways for
yeah,
utilizing, and you get the weirdest off the wall answers. I'm here for it.
right.
I love it.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that he's using it. I hope you would too. I'm very big in making sure we have good representation in these tools, and that includes women.
I
Um,
you know, I forget about it, and it's one of those things that, like, I've got some of the stuff that I like, and it's just it needs to become more habitual, so I have
sure.
started doing it more, and thankfully with his prompting, he's like, "Ask GPT." I'm like, "Yeah, why would I Google that? Let's ask ChatGPT."
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, you'll have to report back more when you use it
I
more.
will, and I do
I
have one quick little anecdote about ChatGPT, which I saw, and I'm not sure this is true, I don't speak French, but apparently in French, it's chat GPT, which is how they say it, but if you speak French, that apparently also means cat I farted.
I think I've heard that
So
too.
now I exclusively refer to it as chat GPT, because it just amuses me. So I don't normally like that kind of humor, but when everybody's so excited about chat GPT, and all I was thinking was French news cycles where that was going on constantly and people on the
That's
news
so
were saying it. I was like, that's the humor that warms my heart sometimes.
Hey, we all need to have fun sometimes. So I cannot let us end this interview without talking about the music side because you really started in music. You studied opera at the Eastman School of Music, and then through your 20s, you were in a rock band. And I know you sort of talked about that a little bit before, but the opera piece, do you still do anything with opera now, or you've mainly sort of settled in the I think you mentioned soulful blues maybe?
Yeah, yeah. We in my old band, we used to call it classic rock and soul. Um, I my cats don't hear very well anymore. They're a little bit older, but I usually torture them with an aria now and then. I don't perform as much because as a part of the burnout piece of that, in my burnout recovery, I really miss music. I really miss
Mhm.
performing, but I also recognize the amount of time that it took to do that.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy it, but I've shifted to a place where I'm a little bit happier as a consumer of
Mm.
music. And I had even put that down aside from like listening to, Spotify or Pandora or something like that. I had put that down prior to the pandemic, prior to burnout. And just before the pandemic, I had started like traveling to see bands again and going to shows and really kind of like that was part of my burnout recovery was lighting that fire again. And then the pandemic came and like shut everything down. So I was just easing my way back into that. And I think at some point I've thought about that, going back to opera and going back to performing. And actually one of my clients is more into like choral and aria style music. And she was like, I'm going to recruit you. And I was like, not yet, because I recognize the amount of time that takes to rehearse, and not just in rehearsals, but that's a daily muscle that you're flexing. When I was studying opera, that was something I did every single day. It was, and that's, I just don't have the speed for it right now where I'm at in my life.
Yeah.
And again, I really miss performing, but it takes a lot of preparation. And I have friends who are professional musicians, and that is your life. And if I were going to do something like that, I would need to make it a bigger part of my life. And I really just enjoy being a consumer, for really the first time, just like letting myself settle into it. If I go to see my old band, they always invite me back up. Karaoke is always an option. But I really have enjoyed that journey,
Mm.
because it could have also been, I could look at it so differently and just be like, oh, that's a part of my life that's over.
Mm.
Or, that's a part of my life that I let go. There could be a very sad spin on that. And I
Mm.
examined that of like, is there a place in my life for this right now? And I'm like, there's not, and I don't want it to be the same way.
Mm.
You know, I'm much more comfortable shifting my identity as I grow. I
Mm.
identified as a musician, and I still am one.
Right.
It doesn't change just because I'm not performing or just because I'm not rehearsing. And
Right.
so learning and growing as an individual through burnout and through basically all of the skills and the tools that I use with clients these days to help them do the same thing. I'm like, this is a much healthier evolution of self, I
Mm.
think, at this point.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to following along and seeing when you sort of, get that balance of music back when it's right for you. And certainly it provides like a different outlet of joy, I would assume. So as we wrap up here, Eliza, if people are interested in learning more about you and they want to get on your calendar, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can go to my website at www.drelizacollins.com. And that's probably the fastest way. I am on Instagram. That is my social media platform of choice. I don't have multiple platforms because I don't like managing multiple platforms. So that's where you'll find most of my jackassery and education around burnout and psychedelics. And that's very intermittent. It's kind of one of those things where I do it when it feels right. And I know that is, again, against the grain of what marketing folks say and things like that, but it's where I'm at. And I actually just had a post go viral a couple
Fantastic.
weeks ago. So, it's working. And my handle there is the Burnout Witch.
Fantastic. Well, I know that people will be excited to get in touch with you. And the last question is actually something that I ask every one of my guests, and that is for one word or a short phrase that you would use to inspire another woman to start or grow her business.
Mm. Own your authentic self.
Mm. Yeah, I love that.
We spend
I
so
love that.
much of our time trying to fit in
Mm.
or do the right thing or hack the algorithm or whatever the case may be. I want to know you.
Mm.
Because that's what we buy.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what we consume. That's why, as business owners, we need to be very careful with how much of ourselves we let out because people are consuming us, whether it's our
Right.
content or our skills or our FaceTime or whatever. But that's what I want out of the relationships that I have. If I'm going to go to a female business owner, I want to know you. What got
Mm.
you into this? Why do you do this? What's your passion? How do you refill your cup when you're not here? Because just because it's your passion doesn't mean that you need to make it your whole life,
Mm.
like own your authentic self, I think is the best thing that we can do as female entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. I love that. And I think it goes back to, where we sort of started things a while ago, which is like it's so much work to be somebody else. From yourself. It's so much
So
easier.
often.
So, Eliza, thank you so much for joining me here today and being my guest. Thank you so much to our listeners that have joined us today on the Spark Starter podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure bringing you the uniquely inspiring stories that ignite female entrepreneurs into action. I've been your host, Elizabeth Goede, and on behalf of all the awe-inspiring women entrepreneurs out there, I encourage you to not only dream big, but to ignite those dreams into action. Remember, every spark can lead to an extraordinary fire. So keep the spark alive for today, tomorrow, and the vibrant future beyond. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to never miss a spark. Until next time, stay ignited.